On episode 273 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Dr. Don Rose and discuss his book, Average to Epic, a midlifer's guide to endurance sports and lifelong fitness. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/273. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, and thank you so much for being a part of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. I hope things are going well for you. They're going pretty good for me. Happy to report that my physical therapy is continuing to progress. I'm getting better every day. Went to the doctor, and he cleared me to begin weaning myself from the sling that I had my arm in. If you've ever seen someone who's gone through the surgery of a rotator cuff, the sling they give you has kind of like this pad. It's about maybe a 3-inch pad that you wear between your body. So it kind of torques your arm up and forward. It's a very uncomfortable position to be in all day. So I'm kind of glad I can now start weaning myself off of the sling. He said I can remove the pad, which basically gives me a little bit more freedom of movement of the elbow away from the body, which is wonderful, believe you me. And then, as we're beginning now to progress from a passive movement in the gym, we're moving to more active movement. So as I go through, obviously, I've lost some mobility in that joint, and so we're working really hard to continue to regain that mobility and now to begin to build some strength in the joint. So things are progressing really well, and I'm really happy with the progress so far, and hope to, within about 6 weeks, really kind of be back in the gym, picking up about where I left off. Obviously, I'll have to work my way up. Can't go all the way back in full bore, but using the intelligence that I have and knowing what I know, I'll blend myself right back into working out and begin rebuilding my overall body strength. It has driven me kind of crazy to not be able to get in the gym, but I think now that I'm able to at least get some active movement on my shoulder and not have to depend on the sling, I have a lot more opportunities now to get out and do some things. So I'm looking forward to building in a little bit of cardio and endurance over the course of the next 6 weeks, so that when I do get back in the gym, I'll have the endurance to be able to go a little bit longer on those workouts and push myself a little bit harder than I may if I didn't let that endurance build up. So really glad to see how that's all progressing. And I'm really excited to introduce you to our guest today, because he's Dr. Don Rose has kind of gotten into, he got into endurance sports a little bit later in life. He's a scientist by trade, so he likes to apply his principles and systems to things. And as he started training for endurance races, and he's done, the runs, the bikes, and even the swimming, all the way through to an Ironman. So, this guy understands endurance sports. He understands the different sports, and he really brings kind of a good scientific mind to how you can improve and even build skills that you didn't have before, starting from scratch. And it's a very well put together program that really does kind of talk you through. So whether you're a beginner that's never done this endurance sports stuff, or someone who's been doing it for quite some time, there is quite a lot to learn from Dr. Rose. So with no further ado, I bring you Dr. Don Rose. So Dr. Rose, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thanks for having me today.
I got your book, and I thought, okay, this is going to be good. And I started, I kind of go to the table of contents, start flipping around, and I'm like, okay, this is pretty thorough. It's not your standard, here's a training plan to run a marathon, here's a training plan to go ahead and do a triathlon, here's a training plan to do, a long distance bike run race. It literally is, how do we deal with the food? How do we deal with the mindset? How do we set goals? And how do we really kind of position ourselves to be successful as endurance athletes?
I really kind of wrote the book as a bit of an introductory guide to cover a wide range of endurance sports, because for two reasons. One is that I think many people go into thinking about endurance sports and thinking about achieving something kind of bigger than they've ever achieved before, and they really don't understand kind of what the landscape looks like or what their options are. They may have come at sports through college or high school, but having kind of a breadth of those sports is a good thing. The second is there's a lot of interplay between the sports, and I'm a little bit on the ADHD side from that perspective. I like to try lots of different things, learn about lots of different things. But for example, if you pick up running and you really like running, there's nothing that says you can't move into a triathlon because you can run well, and you pick up the sport of cycling, which isn't that hard to pick up, and then swimming is the other thing. Likewise, if you can do an endurance road bike event, then doing an endurance mountain bike event is not that much more difficult. It's a little more involved with bike handling and that kind of thing. So there's a bit of synergy and crosstalk between the different sports.
And I think, one of the things when I was actually doing my training, I recognized early on that when I do endurance training, if I try to train running just by running, I often found that my body would break down and I wasn't recovering as well. But if I mixed in cycling and some other aerobic activities, I found that my running was better. I was actually faster and I was recovering better. So I think you're right is, you have something that maybe you enjoy or you've over time learned to enjoy, but you can always blend that in with the other sports and get better and better at them until you feel comfortable that you're capable of, swimming the distance, biking the distance, and then running.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for cross training, as they call it, where you're one workout a week may be something totally different. It's just, I think mentally it can be refreshing, but also I think it helps your body just have a little bit of a break. I mean, just getting into the pool and swimming for 30 minutes is a nice break from pounding on your legs or through running or through cycling.
And another thing I really liked about the book was you're coming from a couple different perspectives. One, you've looked into the science of this and you cite quite a few references as you go through the book, but the other is just your personal experience and things that you've done as an endurance athlete, one in our midlives that's trying to get better, trying to go from average to epic. You use some guiding principles in the book. Do you mind going through the guiding principles and telling us what each one is about?
Sure, happy to do that. So the first one is almost nothing is impossible. I think when we think about doing things that are bigger than we've ever thought about doing them before, most of the time we sell ourselves a little bit short on that. And I cite the conversation with my son who wanted to play NBA basketball, and he's probably never going to play and unlikely he'll ever play. And that's probably an impossible goal. But I think for most of us, if you think about running a marathon, for example, there are a lot of people who, if you think about running a marathon, they'll dismiss it as impossible. And I think that for many of the things cited in the book, none of what I put in this book probably is impossible for most people, especially if your goal is to just finish. I think finishing a marathon or finishing even an Ironman triathlon is well within the reach of most folks. The second is understanding your motivations, really kind of why are you doing things. And we find a lot of people who are running a couple times a week, or maybe they're weekend warriors and they'll do a 5K run or something like that. But I think if you think about your motivations and think about goals, and we'll talk about goals in a little bit, it's important to understand why you're doing this, because it will be tough at times, especially during some of the training or when you get injured. And so you need to be clear about why you're getting involved with taking on some of these bigger goals. One person's epic is another person's easy workout. So basically that says that everything is relative, and especially as you kind of move through these different sports. When I first started out, riding 30 miles for me was epic. I'd never ridden that far before on a bike, and the idea of riding 100 miles was almost impossible. And now, to me, that's an average workout. So things will at first seem impossible. And also people you interact with, many of them will be at a different level than you, so don't get discouraged if somebody else is doing things that seem to be way out of the range that you're in. The next one is that this whole thing is really a journey. And we do talk about goals a lot in this book, but I keep going back to this idea that it's really not about getting to the top of the mountain. It's about climbing the mountain. It's about the journey to the top and enjoying that journey, learning as you're going through this process, and not just about the goal. Just really kind of take advantage of and appreciate the journey as you move along. Next one is to think sustainable and to think long term. And this is the idea here is some people will say, well, I'm going to do a marathon, and they'll train, they'll do the marathon, and they'll say, oh, I'm glad that's over. And they're kind of one and done. And you really need to think about, okay, maybe that's just a stepping stone to the next thing, to maybe you're going to do 2 marathons next year, or maybe mix it up with a trail run marathon, or do an ultra marathon, or do a triathlon. So don't just think that kind of that one and done attitude isn't going to provide the kind of the basis for lifelong fitness. Variety is the spice of life. So I've gotten into lots of different endurance sports, and so this book is really about the variety of those different sports. Be prepared to examine your self-image. So I've never considered myself really an athlete at all, and once I became more into sports, I really looked at myself differently, and you need to be prepared for that, because I think some people have an image of themselves, and especially if you're slightly overweight, your body image may change too, and that can change the way you think about yourself and the people around you, how they think about you. The next one is have an attitude of gratitude. So I think that many times we fail to recognize the many blessings we have, the blessings of our body, and how fortunate we are to have time, energy, and the things to do what we do. And the last one is related to that, and it's really don't forget to give back. So all this endurance sports stuff is great. It's wonderful. It really helps you live longer, happier life, but it can be very self-centered at times. And so I think it's important to take yourself out of that self-centeredness at times and do things that do give back. So, for example, I'm coaching a local high school mountain bike team. I also coach a cyclocross team, and that helps me kind of ground myself and not just focus on myself and all my training and all my injuries and everything else. It helps me have a much larger perspective on this whole thing.
Yeah, so many of those principles, just as you're talking, as I was reading, they just resonated. And I think they resonated because I can go back to a specific point in time in my life when I either afoul of that principle and paid for it, or I actually followed the principle and got some really great benefits from it. It's just, for me, I was doing running when I was in my 20s, late 20s and early 30s. And I finished up with this ultra marathon. It was a 50-mile run. And I was thinking after I do this 50 miles, I'll probably go try 100. So I had that in my mind. But when I went through the run, my body broke down so much that I was able to finish, but my body had broken down to a point where my recovery time was kind of extended. So it took me a little over a month to even feel comfortable getting out and moving around and doing a whole lot of running. And so I didn't. And that's when I kind of let running go. I let all endurance sports. In fact, I think I really pretty much had let most of everything go at that point. And that's when I kind of started that slide. And so it's kind of the knowing that there's something next, but being flexible enough to know that it might not be the thing you thought it was going to be, but it still needs to be generally something. And thinking of this more as a journey than just an accomplishment, because I had kind of finished. It felt like I had finished because I had proven to myself I could do this thing. So I just, again, all of those things, the giving back, a lot of the runs and things that I do now, because they're shorter distances, they're built around charities. So there's a fundraising aspect to it, which I enjoy. So I think all of these philosophies are very, very important. And I think, when you get the book and you're going through the book and you're looking at your training and you're looking at what you're going to do, I think it's important for us to go back to these principles regularly and just make sure that we're keeping on tabs for all of them, because there are really great ones.
Yeah, I agree 100% especially on the journey part of it. I think that it's nice to train, and I found myself just enjoying training a lot of times more than I actually enjoy the race. And so that's important. But also I think beyond that, it's to find some of the joy in the things that you're doing as you're proceeding through these goals. So I've returned to running, actually, because I just love running, and trying to find the joy in the running helps across some of those rougher spots when you're training, or helps you really think about kind of being more in the moment and more in the joy of what you're doing at the time. And so, again, goals are important, don't get me wrong, but this idea of kind of having the journey and understanding kind of where you are in the journey is equally important.
Now, I think so many people, again, they look at it that time period thing. And so they're going to say, okay, here's my New Year's resolution, and it's to, lose 15 pounds, or it's, I'm going to go ahead and challenge my buddy, and we're going to run a 5K in the late spring. And so I'm going to get the Couch to 5K program, and then we're going to do that. And that's my little goal. I'm only saying little. It's not little to them at the time. It looks pretty high up, and they know there's going to be some work involved to lose that weight or to do that 5K. But in the book, you kind of encourage us to do something bigger and you call it, and I've heard this term, I think, before, it's the big, hairy, audacious goal. And that's used a lot with business. I hear it a lot in business terms because there's, entrepreneurs will come in and say, you want to 10x your business, don't think 3x, think 10x. This is kind of that same concept applied to endurance sport. Could you kind of go through the big, hairy, audacious goal, the concept, and then how someone can apply it?
Sure. Yeah, I think the idea is that in getting into this, I think a lot of the folks that I'm targeting with this book are probably folks in their 40s or 50s, and they've been through life. They've set goals. They've been successful. They understand about how to achieve certain things in their life, whether it's being a great parent or a business person or whatever it is. And I tried to translate some of that into endurance sports and into exercise. And that's the idea of this big, hairy, audacious goal, is trying to think of something that at this point you probably think is impossible to do. And let's just take an example of a marathon, and you've been running 5Ks, and the idea of a marathon seems just, you can't even wrap your head around it. The idea of running 26 miles just seems impossible. So the idea is to come up with this big, hairy, audacious goal, and a couple of characteristics that I talk about in the book. One, that it needs to be transformational. So if you were to run, instead of a 5K, you were to run a 10K, that's probably not going to be transformational in your life. But if you were to run 26 miles, that would transform something about you, transform how you think about yourself, transform your body for sure, transform a lot of things. It needs to be something outrageous. So the example that I say, if you were to tell your partner, your spouse, I'm thinking about running a marathon, if their response is, that'll be easy for you to do, then it's probably not outrageous enough because they probably know you well enough. But if they respond, are you sure? Are you feeling okay today?
That's every conversation I have with my wife.
That's right. That's probably a little bit outrageous. So it needs to be outrageous. It needs to be outside your comfort zone. That kind of goes hand in glove. It needs to be somewhat risky. In other words, there's probably some chance that you may not achieve it the first time, or that you may have a chance of injuring yourself or whatever. So it needs to be something that's not 100% chance of success. And to your earlier point, it needs to have some long-term aspect to it. So, if I was a couch potato today, my chances of running a marathon in 2 or 3 months is probably not going to happen. And probably it shouldn't happen because your body just can't take that kind of pounding immediately. So if you were going to run a marathon, you should probably think about the long-term plan, not only because you don't want to be kind of in this one-and-done club, but you also would like for this to be a journey. And so I talk in a lot about the book about kind of progressing over several months or even years to get there. It needs to be time-based so that you've got some time associated with it, with sub-goals and milestones along the way. So instead of just saying, I'm going to run a marathon, it has to have some aspects to that. There needs to be a clear finish line so that you've achieved that goal. And then it needs to be meaningful. So, it needs something that you can look back upon and just say, that was significant in my life. So we kind of walk through this and actually give a couple of examples of BHAGs, these big, hairy, audacious goals, and how to kind of work through them. So let's take it as an example, running a marathon. So your big, hairy, audacious goal may just to finish the marathon. That may be the first part, but that may just be the stepping stone to other things. You may first, I want to finish a marathon, but that may not be the final goal. You may want to finish in the top 10% of your age group in a marathon. You may want to finish a marathon under 3:30. You may want to qualify for and run Boston Marathon. You may want to run a marathon in every state. You want to complete an ultra marathon. So there are, those, just because you've got a big, hairy, audacious goal, even getting to that big, hairy, audacious goal may not be something that is the final goal. And so I think I work 3-year plan, for example. I have a fictitious person I reference in the book called Jim, and Jim's in the introduction. And so we return to Jim in this part of the book. And it's actually a 3-year plan for Jim to, year 1 is just a finish. And this is, he's going to spend the first year just finishing a marathon. He may have to walk the last 10 miles to finish that marathon, but to finish the marathon in October, he's got some running background, so that's good. So he's going to finish a 10K. He's going to do a second 10K. He's going to do a half marathon. And then in October, he's going to finish his first marathon in year one. And year two is improving that. And so his goal is to run a sub 4-hour marathon by the end of year two. And then his big, hairy, audacious goal is he wants to get to Boston. He wants to qualify for Boston. And so year three is a really focus on speed and having to run a 3:20 marathon, which sounds, I think for some people, sounds almost impossible. But having, for someone like me who's qualified for Boston, I can tell you it wasn't easy and it took time. It took for me several years to get my body in shape and get the speed that I needed to get to a Boston qualifying time. But it didn't happen overnight. That's why these BHAGs need to be big and they have to take time to progress toward, which really is kind of back to this idea of having a journey that you're thinking about as you're going through this whole process.
Yeah, I can give a perfect example from my life. When I got started on my, for lack of a better word, health and fitness reboot, I wanted to do a Tough Mudder. That's a 12-mile run with 25 obstacles. And I wanted to do it with my daughter. My daughter was 21 years old, and so I asked her, I said, she was into CrossFit and all that, and I said, do you want to go do a Tough Mudder with me in November? And she's like, absolutely. So now we signed up for the race. And I'm like, okay, as a kind of a precursor to this, I need to start trying to lose weight because I'm carrying about 60 extra pounds that I really don't need to take on that course with me. And I need to get my cardiovascular fitness and my strength and everything built up. So it was a kind of a cross-training opportunity because I knew the training I would have to do would be across the board. It wouldn't just be running. It wouldn't just be lifting. I really had to do both. And we did a Warrior Dash, which was just a 5K version of kind of the same thing, a little bit easier. And I did that one in March. So starting around November, started working on this. And then right after March, when I had done that Warrior Dash, I'm like, I feel comfortable that I'm going to be able to do this. So my goal kind of stepped up a little bit. And then I was like, I really don't want my daughter waiting on me. I want to be the one that's there with her. So I don't want to just be trained up enough to just finish. I actually at that point had changed my mind that what I really needed was to finish with her rather than her finish with me. And so that was my goal. My goal was to get myself in the kind of shape where I could keep up with my 21-year-old daughter. And I'm not going to say that's the kind of thing everybody should try to attain, but I thought that was a pretty big goal for myself. And it did make me work a lot harder. It made me work a lot smarter too, because I really did focus a lot on what training I was doing and why I was doing it. So I wasn't wasting effort trying to get better at something that wasn't going to make me better in that race.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that a couple points there. One is that you can change your goals as you move along. So in Jim's case, maybe for Jim it was to finish a marathon in the first year, but he may have moved that up. He felt really good. He may have done a half marathon, and he said, well, I think that I can break 4 hours in my first marathon. And so instead of just finishing a marathon, he's got this goal of finishing under 4 hours. And so certainly you can change those. I think when people get into problems is without experience, they set goals too high and they don't achieve them and they get discouraged and somehow fall out of this. So I guess back to you, I mean, if you had not been able to keep up with your daughter through that, would that have changed how you thought about your next goal?
No, because I would have been standing there at the finish line with her. I would have seen the picture and I would have told her, I said, you want to do this again next year? Because next year I want to be better at this. So I now have a time that I've recorded for that particular race. And I'm like, they might change up the obstacles that would slow me down. That's fine. But the next time we do this, I want it to be the same thing. Only this time I want to keep up with you. So I'm going to be targeting a time that's faster than what I did on the first one. And I think the other thing that you kind of have to look at is you have to be realistic and look backwards and realize just the progress you made. So in Jim's case, if he got to year 3 and he was just short of qualifying, he still has to look at the fact that 3 years earlier, he was on the couch and now he's running marathons and he's running them faster than a lot of people half his age.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's a great point about just experience. I mean, setting goals without a lot of experiences can be frustrating. And so that's where I think that just getting some races, getting some events under your belt gives you a sense of kind of where do I stand. So in the book, we're not going to talk about it today, but in the back, I've got some tests for understanding kind of where your fitness is today. And those can be useful as you move through this process. But once you do your first race, your timed event, whatever it is, you'll have a sense of, okay, where did I finish relative to everybody else? Was I mid-pack? Was I top 10%? Was I dead last? Whatever it is, you've got some idea of where you sit. And sure, in your Tough Mudder, you probably look back, right? You probably looked at where are people who are my age finishing this race? Was I in the top 10% or whatever? And that can give you some guidance for, do I have a shot at Boston if I'm finishing in the top quarter of my age group in a marathon? If I'm finishing in the bottom half, you've got more work to do. You may need to adjust kind of where you are as you're moving through this.
And it doesn't always have to be, I think as you're kind of setting these goals, it doesn't always have to be about being better time or beating other people. When I was doing the marathons, I stopped caring about time and I started enjoying the locations that I went to. So like I went to Big Sur, I did Washington, D.C., ran the Blue Angels down in Pensacola was my first one. So for me, it was more about, where's a cool place I can go and do this? So kind of like you talked, let's do it in 50 states or something like that. It can be a part of a different thing that's just more in tune to the fact that you like to travel and you like to experience new cities. And so you up and try these different things. And that's the satisfaction that you take for it. That's the big, hairy, audacious goal is, I want to run in, these different cities or these different states, and I want to do these runs. I can tell you that the Big Sur was a lot harder than the Pensacola run. The one in Washington, D.C. was even harder than that, surprisingly, but it was really just because of the congestion of people. There were so many people running that race that it just made it difficult at the start, and I think that put me off of my pace. And so as I was running it, it's just that one took me a lot more time and it was a lot harder. But that was an experience. It was just kind of understanding which runs am I going to enjoy? What are the things I want to see? So I just think there's a huge opportunity here when you're setting your goal to make it more than just a time or whatnot. It can be about a place. It can be about time with family. My brother challenged me, or didn't challenge so much as asked if I wanted to be on his Ragnar team. Unfortunately, the race got canceled, but I went on to the Ragnar team and I was like, everybody else on the team is in their 30s. And I was looking at the course and I'm like, well, the parts I want to run and the parts I'd like to run are actually the longest. I would actually have been running more miles than any of the others. But I was like, fine. I said, okay, well, I'm going to target a 9-minute mile if that works for you. He's like, absolutely. So, that was what my training started to be, was how do I get to a point where at any point I can run the 9 miles in a 9-minute pace, and then I get a rest for a couple hours before I'd go back and run maybe another 7 or 4. So that was what my training was all about. And it was a big goal. I didn't get to it because the race was canceled, and it's outside my control. But I'm a little disappointed. I didn't get to spend that quality time with my brother. But for me, that's what my big, hairy, audacious goals are always about, is the balance of, like you said, making it a journey and making it meaningful from your principles. Because I think if it's just time, excites you, great, but it's not going to excite everybody. So just find your thing.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this idea of what motivates you. I mean, there's some people who are totally about the time, and all they think about is the time. And that can be fine. That can be a little hollow at times. But it's also, other people, like you said, like to travel. And I know a guy who does triathlons here locally. He probably does 30 triathlons a year. They're all short triathlons, but he knows everybody. So for him, his motivation is about community. And he just wants to be with people and wants to have a good time and wants to stay in shape. And that motivates him to do 20 or 30 triathlons a year. I could never do that. I would go kind of batty doing that many. I'd have to have bigger goals, and for me, it'd have to be something just different. But everybody's motivated differently. That's the point. Is to at least understand what your motivation is in going into that, and those motivations will change over time as you kind of progress through these different goals.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Dunn, let's go through your 10 truths of training, because I think we've gotten people to a point where they're going to want to train for endurance sports at some level. Let's talk about your 10 truths of training.
Okay. So I assembled these based on my experience in training, and I also assembled them because most of what I've read about training tends to come from experts in the field or coaches or people who've done lots and lots of athletic endeavors, and I'm not that person. And so I wanted to really these kind of, I wanted to boil down in my mind kind of what are some of the things that are the essence of training that can be applied across these many sports. So the first one is everybody and everybody is different. So this idea is that you can go and buy a training plan off the internet. You can buy a book on how to train for a marathon. And those are great starts, but you have to realize that everybody's body is different. And so one size does not fit all when it comes into training. And so just recognizing that is important as you're moving into this. Now, the second is know thy body, know your body. And again, because everybody's body's different, the way you train, the way you race, the way your body responds to training and racing is going to be different. And so you just need to know what that little pain is that you're starting to get in your left ankle. And is that something that's recurring? Is it lasting beyond the run? Just knowing your body can save you a lot of time from injuries. It can help you know when you maybe overcooked yourself a little bit, but just kind of being aware of your body is extremely important. Training is more art than science. And so I talk a lot about kind of the training tools, all the heart rate monitors and power meters and that kind of thing. And those are great tools to have. But again, you're dealing with a human body. You're dealing with your own psychology. You're dealing with a changing body over time. And so training has to deal with that change. And so even if you have a coach, science is going to inform how that coach may put together a training plan, or science is going to inform your training regimen. But it's really a lot more, there's a lot more flexibility. And I guess the major point there is don't stick to the numbers too much, that there's a lot more sort of latitude in looking at the kind of quantitative side of the sport. The other one is a Kenny Rogers quote, which is, know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And this applies to training and applies to racing. I think that an important parameter if you're doing training, especially intervals, many times they say that if you can't sustain that interval for the next interval, in other words, you have to drop in speed or drop in power or something, that should be an indication that maybe you've reached some maximum limit and it's time to quit. I have quit several races for various reasons, some just psychological. I've had a couple instances where I just didn't want to go on, and it was hard. I had one where I injured myself, and it was good that I quit early, because if I'd have kept going, I think I would have injured myself even further. So just kind of knowing when to cut your losses. And again, this ties back to your body. If your body's telling you you need to think about what you're doing, is this going to be adding more injury, then you may need to cut your losses early. There's a fine balance here, of course, because many times in endurance sports, your mind is telling you to stop, and you have to push on. So knowing your body is really important so that you don't injure yourself. I think that's the takeaway from that. Number 5 is recovery. So especially older athletes, they need more time for recovery. And the last Ironman triathlon that I did, I probably only did probably 4 workouts a week and spent a lot of time in recovery. And I would say that I did fine because of that. And so your body needs to recover quite a bit. Number 6, planning is important. Flexibility is part of reality. So again, I think it's great to have a training plan, but life gets in the way. Travel, illness, sick kids, spousal plans, all those things will come into play. And so you just can't stick to the plan all the time. So you have to be flexible and to really understand what's important. I have a buddy of mine who trains for triathlons, and he has a coach. And at some point he told the coach, just tell me which are the most important workouts this week. And the coach said, these 3 workouts are the most important. And so he was able to move his training plan around each week to make sure he included all 3 of those workouts, and made a huge difference in his training because he had some idea of how to be flexible. Consistency is the key. So too much flexibility results in inconsistent training. And even if it's a short workout, sometimes you may have a chance for only a 15-minute workout, but just that 15 minutes could be important as you consider the consistency of your workouts. Number 8 is to find a training rhythm. And this is important, especially if you're in something like a triathlon where you're doing the 3 different sports. If you can get a rhythm of, okay, every Monday is my day off, every Wednesday is my long run, Friday is my swim, and then Sunday is my long bike ride. And you kind of set up a rhythm that works for in your schedule and your life schedule. Then once that rhythm is set up, it just makes training a lot easier. Number 9 is avoid the middle ground. The idea here is that too many times people, when they train hard, don't train hard enough, or when they train easy, they don't train easy enough. And especially kind of the high-intensity type A folks don't understand about training easy. So going out on that bike ride and just barely breathing is hard for somebody who's an intense person. They feel like they've got to be breathing hard all the time. And it turns out that in training, that's not the case. You need to have short, high-intensity training, but also some longer, very, very low-intensity training. In fact, I think a lot of people don't train low-intensity enough for some of the things they do. The last one is don't use a workout as a measure of fitness gains or losses. And this is what I have a problem with is when I'll have a really super workout, and I will think, oh, gosh, I've made some really great advances in my training, or I have a really bad workout, and I think, I'm not getting anywhere with this training. It's too easy to look at a single workout. It's just like weight gain and weight loss. People look at a scale, and they think, oh, I've gained a pound or two, or I've lost a pound or two. You have to look at the long term. You have to look at results over a long term, race results and things like that, and really understand where your gains and losses are based on a much longer term and not just these short term workouts.
Yeah, well, I have to raise my hand and say I'm guilty of that last one quite often myself.
Everybody is.
Because I'll go in, I'll say, okay, here's the deadlift. And deadlift is my favorite lift of all time. My doctor doesn't want me doing it. He's like, that's going to hurt your back. I'm like, well, not if you have good form. But I go in and sometimes I'll have a workout and my trainer will be like, wow, you knocked out 10 on that second set. You were only doing 6 last workout. I'd be like, that's great. And then I may come in the next workout and for some reason or another, that weight now is heavy again at 6. And I stop and I'm like, I feel bad about that workout, although I'm exhausted and worked out when I leave. And what I just have to do is flip back in my training log to 2 or 3 months ago and realize, okay, what was I doing for 10 reps back then? And then it's like, oh, well, okay, I was 30% lighter back then. I've gained 30% strength since then. So I need to kind of really focus on the fact that I am showing this improvement and not beat myself up because I had what I would call one bad workout.
Yeah, it happens all the time, especially if you've had something the day before. So, I may do a heavy lift one day and then I go out and do a run and I feel like my legs are like lead because of the heavy lift the day before. And I'll tend to use that slow run as an indication of I'm really out of shape. And so you just need to put it all in perspective and look at the long game and not the short game.
And so the book, Average to Epic, we've only really scratched the surface with this conversation because you talk about nutrition in there. You also get into form. You get into terminology. So someone like myself that's not really in the bike thing and doesn't know all of the terms now has some kind of guidance to go in there and say, okay, when they're saying this, that's what they mean. Because without that, you're a little lost at the beginning. So this is a really good book for anyone that's considering endurance sports or that's doing endurance sports to just really kind of go soup to nuts of how do you really prepare yourself to be successful on some form of endurance. And I think a lot of it's even applicable to other training modalities, but you do focus on the endurance. And I think the cool thing is you share your experiences going through each of these because you have experience with all of them. And I really appreciated that you brought that to the book because it kind of gave us this realness of we're not always talking about the fake guy Jim. Sometimes we're talking about Dr. Rose.
Yeah, no, the latter part of the book, I've got a number of race reports, and, I throw in a couple where things didn't go really well. So one, in fact, I was a mountain bike endurance race where I flipped off the bike and landed on my shoulder and separated my shoulder and, took a DNF. And so, they don't always end up successful, and you don't always get to your goal that you want to get to. But I think it's important people understand that there are setbacks, and that's just part of life and part of endurance training.
So, Dr. Rose, if someone wanted to get in touch with you to find the book, where would you like for me to send them?
So the book's on Amazon, and you can go there. I also have a blog called midlifefitnesscrisis.com, and so a lot of my race reports are there, and many of the race reports that are there are also in the book as well. So you can go there to contact me. And I'm also on Instagram, the Don Rose on Instagram. So I post some things on there as well.
Well, this is episode 273. So you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/273, and I'll make sure to have all of the links there. So again, Dr. Rose, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
My pleasure. I appreciate the time.
If you enjoyed this podcast, would you please go to iTunes, subscribe, give a rating and review? By doing that, you help move us up the charts a little bit. More people find this great information and get to meet and listen to these great authors. So I really would appreciate if you would go to iTunes, give us a rating and review, and subscribe to the podcast. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Dr. Dale Bredenson and discuss his book, The End of Alzheimer's. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.